This is Polyamory Weekly, tales from the front of responsible non-monogamy from a pansexual, kink-friendly point of view. A warning for our under-18 listeners. This is an adult-oriented podcast about really lascivious things, like communication and honesty in relationships. If you're under 18 and looking for upfront advice and answers to questions about sex, please visit scarletteen.com.
This is Polyamory Weekly, episode 510 from March 23rd, 2017. Coming up on today's show, The Smart Girl's Guide to Polyamory is coming up on today's show. Hello, everyone. I am your host, Meeks. Welcome back. Welcome to episode 510. And I have with me in the co-host chair this week,
Lusty Guy, indeed. Welcome to episode 510. Very happy and lucky to be here as always, and I hope you all are having as great a time as I am.
Yes, we have so much interesting stuff going on in the poly world this week.
And, that's just the public stuff. We're not even talking about the private stuff.
Yeah,
You got to have your official, poly agenda card to know the private stuff, which you all do, I'm sure.
What we're talking about is that there have been several public mentions of polyamory and a very interesting poly in the news article this week. So before we get to the interview with Dedeker Winston, the author of The Smart Girl's Guide to Polyamory, which, by the way, Lusty Guy did not join us for, so you kind of got him at the beginning and at the end.
And not in the middle.
It's sort of like the maitre d'.
Or I'm the bread of the sandwich.
There you go. He's the white bread of the sandwich.
I'm the white
in more
bread
ways
of the sandwich.
than one.
Indeed.
A couple things come up that I just wanted to chat about in this host chat section this week. The first of which being, I don't know if you guys know, but NPR and some other podcast creators are participating in this tripod campaign for the month of March. It's #tripod, which you can use on any social media platform, and they're encouraging people to write about the podcasts that they listen to with the #tripod so you can recommend them to your friends. And this month, as I was listening to NPR's Planet Money, as I do, they had an economist come on. His name was Tim Harford, and he actually was analyzing a relationship question from an economist's point of view, and somebody called in and asked a question about polyamory. And I'm listening to this while I'm walking down the street going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Right? And what is fantastic is the economist didn't blink at the idea of polyamory or question like, why are you doing that? That's crazy or anything, but simply said something that every poly expert, guru, or practitioner basically will tell you, which is that love may be unlimited, but time is not. Which made me wonder if Mr. Harford is actually poly. This is something that poly practitioners are wont to say, but most monogamous people, unless you happen to be poly adjacent, are not familiar with that particular idiom. And what I love about it is that in the podcast, it was just not a big deal. It was just another relationship question, and he answered it in a very intelligent way and then moved on to the next one. So cool. I'm like, look, poly's mainstream. It's on an NPR podcast. That is not about relationships.
Boring, even. What was your line? You wanted poly to be as boring as peanut butter?
Yes, I want poly to be as boring and mundane as peanut butter so that people don't even fucking talk about it anymore. Because it's just normal.
It's just an option.
It's just an option. Now, in terms of our polyamory, what's going on with Poly Weekly in particular, we had a couple new blog posts go up this week, and I know a lot more people listen to the podcast than actually visit the blog, so I thought I'd mention it here. The first new blog post is, we have started the Poly Book Nook. Whenever we have an author come on the show, we actually have them do a blog post interview a few weeks beforehand, just so you can, find out a little bit more about the book in advance. One of those, where we have an interview coming up, is for this book called The Art of Three, which is by Erin McRae and Racheline Maltese. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name right. I guess I will find out. And it's a poly romance novel. So if you're looking for a romance novel and you want something that includes a gal and two guys the perfect way.
It appeals to some of us.
Why does she have to choose between the two hot guys? She doesn't in this novel.
Just has to coordinate.
And we'll be talking with the authors in a couple of weeks. But if you're interested in the book, you can read the blog interview at polyweekly.com, and I'll provide a link to that particular post in the show notes. Lusty Guy has also been going to town writing some blog posts.
Yeah, your editing queue is full.
I know. I have more that you've written that I need to go through and do a quick edit on. But the latest one that I don't think I've talked about on the show yet is when you wrote about your lifelong relationship with polyamory called My Poly Story.
Yeah, I think that everyone in the community has their own, I think, what is it that Kevin calls them? Their poly origin stories?
The poly origin story, yes, because we have comic nerds.
Right. I used to refer to them as the poly coming out stories, but I like his version better, the poly origin story. And I think it's one of the features of our community that we all get together at various points and share our origin stories. So you get to read mine.
And we'll provide a link to that in the show notes. If you have the Polyweekly app on your iPhone or Android, it'll be attached. Otherwise, you can find it at polyweekly.com. And one more, we've referred to this so many times that I decided it made sense to write it up as a blog post. When we talk about jealousy, we talk about two things. We talk about doing the and then what exercise, and we talk about discuss, distract, do. And I haven't gotten to writing up the latter yet, but I did write up the and then what exercise as a blog post. So now whenever we refer to it, we can send people to the link and get that exercise that you can practice on your own at home to deal with any jealousy or fear or insecurity you may be encountering.
And it's really, that's exactly right. And to underscore, it is for more than just jealousy. It works for any fear inside, outside of a relationship, any anxiety that you have. It's a wonderful exploratory tool to get to the heart of that.
Exactly. And by the way, to loop back to that hashtag tripod, if you like, and you're on social media and you like what we do here on Poly Weekly, we would love it if you would post a tweet or a Facebook post or, hell, do it on LinkedIn. We're on LinkedIn. Cunning Minx on LinkedIn. Hashtag tripod, say, and provide a list of the podcasts that you listen to and enjoy, and we'd be honored if you would include Poly Weekly among them. But wait, there's more. Lusty Guy had an idea for doing some Poly in the Heartland interviews on your next road trip. Do you want to talk about that?
That's right. One of the things that we bump into all the time and hear all the time is that poly is very different in the heartland, in the more rural areas. As it turns out, I'm going to be traveling from Seattle to Texas to go boar hunting. Yeah. I
he kills pigs.
I can't wait. It's going to be fun. But in any case, and I'm going to be driving. And I thought, you know what? What a great opportunity to actually meet some folk that are living a poly lifestyle in the heartland and maybe get some cool content. So if you are on the road from Seattle to Boise, Boise to Albuquerque, or Albuquerque to Dallas, that's the rough route that I'm going to be taking, May 9th through the 11th, and you wouldn't mind me stopping by with a little recording device and we can chat for a half hour, an hour on your poly origin story and your life as a poly practitioner away from the urban areas. I think it might be really interesting. It might be an opportunity for the urban and rural areas to meet a little bit. So if that appeals to you and you're on that path and you wouldn't mind an hour or so visit stopover, drop a line to lustyguy@polyweekly.com, and we'll talk about making that happen and get you on the show.
What if they're in an urban area like Albuquerque?
That's fine too. I don't imagine that I'm going to be so swamped with people that, so, wherever you are in that route, we'll just change the title. We'll make it from Poly in the Heartland to Poly in Albuquerque.
There you go. Ooh, I like that. We can do Poly in Albuquerque, Poly in Boise, Poly in insert small town of your choice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, fun. And if that went by too quickly, again, we'll provide that email address and everything in the show notes at polyweekly.com. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but we had very quietly this last week a landmark court case in the U.S. for polyamory.
Yeah, this is pretty big, actually.
This is a big deal. There was a judge in New York that awarded what is being called tri-custody, three-way custody of three parents of a child.
Now, it is New York. I don't know how much it applies outside that jurisdiction, or even if it's statewide, it might only be countywide. Nevertheless, it's really cool to see a judge willing to say, you know what? Actually, this kid's got three parents, and you guys need to share.
Here's what happened. So basically, there was a couple in Long Island. They were married, and then they ended up having a relationship with their downstairs neighbor. The couple is called Don and Michael Morano, and their neighbor is Audrey Garcia. So the couple wed in 1994 and then met their downstairs neighbor Audrey in 2001. It turns out the wife in the couple, Dawn, was infertile, and so the husband in the couple, Michael, fathered the boy with Audrey Garcia, and they have court papers to that effect. It was pretty clear that throughout the entire pregnancy and the early childhood that this was a three-way relationship and a three-way parenting relationship. The insurance covered Garcia's pregnancy. The women went to doctor's appointments together. They took turns feeding the baby. It was very clear that this was a three-way co-parenting thing.
It just struck me that all of those examples listed were examples of interaction between
the women.
Yeah, that's right.
Not included.
Yeah.
Which foreshadows what happened next.
Dun, dun, dun.
Which is that Dawn and Audrey decided that they wanted to be just a couple. So they moved out into their own home. And what happened was Michael, the husband, sued for sole custody of the son. So then Dawn sued her husband, Michael, for divorce.
It gets complicated. You should just read the article, because there was also a suit between the woman against the woman that she's living with to make sure that she gets shared custody. And it gets detail oriented, as these things always do.
Yeah.
But the final takeaway being that at the end of the day, the court recognized that tri-custody was the best answer here.
Right. What the judge decided was that it would not be in the best interest of the child to have the father, Michael, have sole custody. Summer, which was the representation, said in an interview Thursday, what's most important, as the New York Court of Appeals understood in the Brooke S.B. case, is the best interest of children in secure relationships with their parents, whether or not the family is connected through biology or marriage. The children come first. Alan did an excellent Polly in the News article about it, providing links to all sorts of primary and secondary source material. I first read about this in an article from Cosmo, if you can believe it, that came up on my Google search for polyamory, but it's been written about in Glamour magazine and Slate. There's commentary from Diana Adams, our favorite poly-friendly lawyer, and there's all sorts of source material if you really want to dig into it. But basically, what it came down to was the judge decided that this kid thinks that all three of these people are his parents. There's no reason to believe otherwise. All their actions over the years have indicated this, and awarding sole custody to one parent, regardless of who that parent is, simply wouldn't be in the child's best interest. This is a big fucking deal.
Absolutely. It's very nice to see this recognized by a court. As I say, I don't know exactly which court, where it fits in, what the decision will mean for somebody that doesn't live in New York, if anything. Having said that, it's still worthy of being celebrated.
Now, of course, I automatically jump forward to the next step. Celebrate the win. Let's celebrate the win. And then I wonder, well, what if Audrey Garcia had not actually given birth to the child, but was recognized in every other way as a parent? I think it's probably less likely. The fact that she actually gave birth to the child made it, of course, much more valid, but this opens the door for that question to be asked, I think.
Or what if the child's legal parents had been united instead of a divided front? I mean, you can
right.
You can wonder about ways it might have spun out and all kinds of things. There's also the question, will it be appealed? And if it will be appealed, what happens?
It does sound like the husband is appealing and feels that it was an injustice and still wants sole custody.
So we'll see what happens. Nevertheless, good news for today.
Yeah. And that being said, I'm going to say a temporary bye-bye to Lusty Guy while we jump into this interview with Dedeker Winston, the author of The Smart Girl's Guide to Polyamory and host of the Multiamory podcast. I am very excited to welcome to the Poly Weekly Studios somebody that I only recently discovered. I only recently found out about her Multiamory podcast and her new book, Smart Girl's Guide to Polyamory. So welcome to the show, Dedeker Winston.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, I'm very glad to have you here. Now, for people like me who maybe you only just popped onto our radar, can you give a little introduction of you and your work?
Certainly. So I crash landed in the poly scene about 7 years ago or so, at least personally, not necessarily on a public level. And my goodness, it's just been a wild ride since then. As everybody knows, it feels like everyone has an adventurous poly story of how they got involved in it one way or another. So I got involved with my podcast, Multiamory. So the podcast was created by myself and two of my other partners. And not all of us are together anymore, but we've still maintained the podcast, which has actually been pretty amazing if you think about it.
I have to interject and say, congratulations. There have been so many awesome poly podcasts that have come and gone because the partners broke up and they didn't have the heart to keep going, which I totally understand.
Yeah.
I totally get how hard that is. But kudos to you and your crew for keeping it up. That is, you folks who don't podcast do not realize how very difficult that is.
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, just a podcast in general, so many podcasts, even when they're not relationship based, experience pod fade, which is people are very excited at the beginning. And then after 10 episodes, they kind of disappear. There's already that you're working with. Plus, we've been working with trying to negotiate 3 different people's schedules on a weekly basis for 2.5 years now. That in itself is a miracle.
3 different poly people's schedules.
Yes, exactly. Which is a logistical nightmare on any given day of the week. And then on top of that, the fact that all 3 of us have gone through major life upheavals in the past 2.5 years of, relationships between, the 3 of us changing and shifting and breaking up and getting back together and breaking up. And then also our other partners, partners coming and going. I left and traveled the world for 1.5 years, so even in the midst of all this crazy, chaotic upheaval that we were still able to maintain the podcast has been, nothing short of a miracle. And it's been just so great. We've kind of the fortunate and unfortunate thing being that there's not a lot of poly podcasts out there. That are still running. Poly Weekly, obviously, you're kind of like the queen of the poly podcast scene. You've been going strong for so long, but so many others are just like kind of sporadic or here and there. And so we're so happy to be in this kind of relatively tight-knit community of poly content creators. So, that's kind of the multi-amory portion of my life, the co-hosting portion of my life. And then about 2 years ago was when I started on this whole book writing adventure. And that's seriously been a thrill ride. I never had a dream of writing a book. I never had a dream of being a writer, but it just it was in me and then it came out. And that's probably the simplest version of the story I can tell. But yeah, the past 2 years of creating this book has been such a learning process of, even figuring out how the traditional publishing world works and the whole adventure of explaining polyamory and relationship anarchy and non-monogamy to people who are in very traditional publishing roles who don't quite understand how to market such a book. It's been a really interesting learning process for sure.
And the book, for the record, official title is The Smart Girl's Guide to Polyamory, Everything You Need to Know About Open Relationships, Non-Monogamy, and Alternative Love. And as an author myself, I can say excellent use of keywords in the title and subtitle.
Gosh. Yeah. It was all search engine optimization on that one.
So what is it that inspired you to write the book? It's an awful lot of work and time, and nobody gets rich writing books for the most part. So why did you decide to write this book?
It's funny because I was about 6 months into writing the manuscript when I had this moment of like, wait, why am I doing this? Like, why did I decide to do this? This is ridiculous. But it all started, about 2 years ago. And, a couple people had kind of planted this seed of, have you thought about writing a book? Have you thought about writing a book? And I was kind of like, well, I don't know, maybe, I guess, maybe I could try, and I started kind of fiddling with putting together an outline. I knew I wanted to write a book about relationships and obviously about my style of relationships, which is polyamorous and happily non-monogamous, but I wasn't quite sure yet kind of what the angle would be. And one day I was flipping through, I don't know, I must have been in the doctor's office or something. I was flipping through an issue of Cosmo, and dating advice it was physically nauseating reading Cosmo. And that's not necessarily to cast aspersions upon the magazine itself, but the advice in there was just, it was so disempowering, and it was so manipulative, and it was so very, very extremely passive. And it seriously just literally turned my stomach, that I realized, like, oh my goodness, like my generation of women and the generation before ours and the generation of women that are to come are being fed this, are being taught this, are being taught that this is the way that you find relationships, that this is the way that you find love. That inspired me to start doing a little bit more research. I looked, and on Amazon, like in the top 10 of dating titles, and specifically for, dating books that are marketed to women, it's things like Ignore the Guy, Get the Guy. It's things like Why Men Love Bitches. There's literally like a title that's up there that's about essentially how to gold dig your way to success. Of course, there are fantastic dating and relationship books out there, but I was just like, I gotta put something into the world that treats women like they actually have agency and like they actually have choices, and like they can actually reach out and get what it is they want, and kind of craft what it is that they want in their relationships and their sex life, as opposed to trying to manipulate someone else into giving it to them.
You know what I like about the title that I didn't just realize until now is that most of the books about polyamory these days are couple-centric.
Yes.
It's generally, people in general and couples in particular, they tend to be directed to couples, although there are notably some books that have chapters on solo poly these days. Huzzah. But I just realized that your book is directed at women, and specifically at women who may or may not be in a couple, but it's not making assumptions about the relationship status of the woman who is seeking polyamory. And it is assuming that it is the women who are seeking poly, because 9 times out of 10, it's the girls.
Exactly.
Everybody thinks it's the guy's idea.
Exactly.
It is sometimes the guy's idea, but most of the time it's the girl's idea.
Yeah, and that was also something that was another inspiring factor when I was writing the book, is when I started looking at the actual research. And unfortunately, there hasn't been a ton of research done into non-monogamous relationships. Hopefully that'll start changing. But even statistically, like, there's numbers to back that up, that women are more likely to ask for an open relationship than men are. Which does, of course, totally flip on its head all of our cultural assumptions around what it is that women want in a relationship, what it is that men want in a relationship. And yes, I definitely wanted to bring to it this idea that you don't have to be in a couple to be polyamorous. You don't even have to have partners right now to be polyamorous. You don't have to be straight. You don't have to be bi. You don't have to look this very particular way. That, you can be a single woman right now wanting to know kind of what the next step is for your relationships, and you can be making this choice. Because that is something that I saw, is that a lot of the content about poly is very couple-centric, which is, totally understandable. That's how a lot of people come to this. Mm-hmm. But I think that I've found that it's a whole other experience for the people who come to this not in a couple. To the people who start their relationships as non-monogamous, like from the beginning, like it's not an opening up process. And it's not to say that that approach is better or worse or whatever, but it comes with its whole different sets of challenges and positives and negatives. And I really wanted to be representative of that in the book, and I did try to make it very clear in my introduction that, I don't want to make assumptions about what relationship status you are. When I refer to talking to your partner at any point in the book, I mean, whether that's one partner or 2 partners or 3 partners, like whoever's involved in that relationship.
So who did you target this book at? Who did you write this book for? I assume that most authors write the book for themselves. Sort of the book that you wish you'd had. That's what I did. I assume that's what you did as well, right?
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Yes, definitely. I mean, that didn't become clear to me until much later in the process. When I was first putting together a proposal to pitch to publishers and to pitch to agents, I was very clear, very demographic about it, like, well, women 18 to 35 who maybe have a college education, maybe not, like those very specific demographics. However, it wasn't until the manuscript was actually done and I was reading back through that I was like, oh, holy shit, this is the book that I was dying for when I was 20. dying for. Like, this is what I wanted to read when I was in my early 20s, and that it wasn't there. So yeah, sorry that I don't have a totally unique answer on that one, but it totally ended up becoming true.
So what is in this book that is not in every other book about polyamory? I mean, we are so blessed that we have at least a dozen really good books on polyamory these days. What's different about this one?
A number of things, because that was a challenge heading into it because of the fact that there are such good books, which is fantastic and amazing. And it was really nice to be able to at least look to those books to see like, okay, well, these are the important things that they're covering. And this is kind of the ground they're already covered. And how can I add to that? Not that I'm going in there to negate people or invalidate people or claim that like, no, your book is worse because mine has this. But like, really, how can I build upon that? And so throughout the book, kind of always trying to keep this female experience in mind, but also still be inclusive, meaning that it doesn't mean that you have to have female body parts in order to identify as female or in order to go through some of the issues that women go through in opening this up. My favorite part of the book, which is the nerdiest part of the book, and which I think, to be quite honest, is probably the least popular part of the book, is the chapter that I wrote on the history of the polyamory movement, which, most of the other poly books out there, they touch on a little bit briefly. They touch on like a little bit of like, yes, maybe we'll kind of give a nod to early human beings being possibly non-monogamous. Like, we'll give a nod to the free love movement and to, swingers in the 80s and 90s. And we'll give a nod to, the term polyamory being coined in the 90s. But for this chapter, like, I got really, really down and dirty with like really tracking like, okay, how have cultural assumptions changed going all the way back to super early human tribes all the way up to today. That was just like a super history nerdy thrill ride for me that I totally loved writing. I think the other thing also is, an examination of where we might be headed. And, I do think that a lot of the poly books out there will examine that. I kind of only have the advantage of being like relatively the newest one, so whoever it is that comes after me will have an even better take and even, more detailed information as to kind of what we can see as far as the future of how we deal with relationships. But yeah, I'd say that those are probably the primary things that I've brought to the table. And I would like to believe that, in writing a book that's specifically tailored to women, that it's, I never want to make the case that, oh, women have an easier time doing this, or, oh, women have a harder time doing this. I just kind of wanted to highlight the fact that there are different stories to be told, and highlight the fact that there is, I think, a great solidarity to be found among women who are in the poly community because of that.
Yeah. Speaking of stories, would you mind sharing with us your poly backstory? Like how you came into poly, how long you've been poly, your favorite poly mistake?
Oh, my favorite one. Oh, dear. Yeah, certainly. So as I said, this all began for me about 7 or 8 years ago now. And it was, for me, for some people when they learn about poly, it's kind of like, oh, that's cool. Maybe I'm curious. Maybe I'll try it. I'm kind of good either way. And for some people, it's much more of a, oh my goodness, I've come home moment, as soon as they learn about something that's not monogamy. And for me, it was very much that. I was raised very conservatively. I was raised in a Christian home with very traditional values around relationships and romance and sex and gender roles. And from a very early age, and particularly when I was a teenager, when I was first starting to kind of play around with adult relationships, that I would find myself in a relationship where I was very happy, where I felt like I was in love, where I really liked the person a lot, but I would still be interested in somebody else. I would still get a crush on somebody else. And considering the basis of my knowledge about romance up to that point, I thought that I was a freak. Because the Disney movies don't tell you that that is possible to happen when you're in love with somebody. I thought that when you truly are in love with someone and if they're making you happy, then you don't even see anybody else. No one even catches your eye. No one even looks appealing. My teenage years and basically through my entire college years, I would slip into like horrible, horrible self-loathing depression anytime this happened. Anytime I developed a crush on somebody that wasn't my partner at the time, because I really thought that I was broken. I really thought like, this is not natural. And I'm this weird freak. I'm like probably the only person on the planet who ever experiences this. And this is going to follow me my entire life. And this is going to ruin all of my relationships.
How did you find out about polyamory then?
When I got out of college, I had been in a monogamous relationship happily for about 3 years. And the cycle was happening again. Someone that I worked with, I was developing a crush on, and he was very flirty with me too. But I was still happy with my boyfriend, and I was about to fall back into this spiral of like, okay, well, I guess I'll just spend the next couple weeks self-loathing, and then maybe this crush will pass, hopefully. As I was venting about it to my best friend, he just kind of very casually tossed out, like, well, have you considered opening up your relationship? I was shocked. And also a little bit disgusted. Because back then I thought, no, open relationships are for people who are sex addicts. Open relationships are for people who don't want to commit to each other. Yes, no, it's so funny that I've ended up where I've ended up, considering the beliefs that I held for so long. No, I was seriously like, what the heck? Like an open relationship, really? Like, no, I'm not going to do that. I love my boyfriend. However, I was kind of at this edge of like, but I don't want to go down this depression cycle once again. And so, I started doing some Googling, and that was when I was confronted with this term polyamory. And that was the huge coming home moment of like, oh my God, people actually do feel this way. And people, not only do they feel this way, but they're creating a life for themselves that is valid and viable and sustainable and making their partners happy as well. And it just blew my mind. It blew the doors off my reality. And so immediately I went all academic on it, and I started reading everything I possibly could, reading all the books. I read Sex at Dawn, I read Ethical Slut, I read all the blog posts and forum posts, and just kind of consumed everything that I could. I got to information overload. Then I was like, okay, like now I got to try this. So my very first open relationship, I pitched the idea. I practically put together a PowerPoint presentation and pitched it to my boyfriend at the time.
I love that idea. Like, okay, now that we've had our lovely dinner, I would like to stand up in front of you and hear the bullet points on why I think that we should try polyamory. I think that's a fantastic idea.
Well, I wish I could say that it was a fantastic idea, because it didn't go over so great.
Oh dear.
I mean, he reluctantly agreed, and then it was just like it was terrible. Actually, my first try it was horrible.
Yeah.
Like, we both so young, and like neither of us knew how to communicate, and neither of us knew what we actually wanted. And so, we kind of struggled through this non-monogamous relationship for about 6 months, and then it ended. And the thing was that even though it ended, it was still like, now I know something that I can no longer not know. I can't unsee this anymore.
Yeah.
Like, there wasn't any going back, even though it had ended this relationship, it had still shown to me like, no, this is actually really what I want. Even in the times it was difficult, it was still like, no, this is actually right for me.
Monogamous relationships end all the time, and people don't say, oh, therefore no more
Yeah.
monogamy, because that monogamous relationship didn't work.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
kudos to you.
And so after that relationship, I spent a couple years in what I call my trial and error period, because it was the times when I got into new relationships, but I was scared to tell people about wanting poly. And so then I would tell them later after feelings were developed, and then that would be really messy. And also, having to handle people say, well, this is just a phase, or people saying, well, no, when you actually fall in love with somebody, then you won't want to have multiple partners anymore. Or people saying like, no, this is pathological, you need therapy. All the usual bullshit things that people toss out. But I didn't know back then, I hadn't really connected to an actual community of other poly people. I still felt very alone in doing this. I even, in those periods of time, like I think I gave monogamy one last shot. I was like, okay, one last chance monogamy with somebody. Like, I met this gorgeous, gorgeous man who was just like the man of my dreams. And I was head over heels for him, and he was head over heels for me. And I thought like, okay, if the Disney movies are right, if what everyone else is saying is right, then this is the time to be monogamous. And this is when it'll be easier. And this is when it'll feel right. And that was my last crack at monogamy. And like, I could only stand it for like a month, like maybe 2 months. And then I was just like, this is, yeah. I know. Some people do that and they stay there for like a couple of years before they're like, oh, actually, this is not for me. And so then, for me, there was a turning point about 3 or maybe 4 years in when I finally decided, like, you know what, I'm going to own this. Like, I'm not going to be ashamed of this anymore. I'm going to own it, and I finally started very openly and blatantly putting it on my dating profiles. I finally very openly started telling people, my friends, potential partners. And that was when finally the right people showed up. It's funny how that happens. But that was when finally, like, surprise, surprise, the people who wanted the same things that I did found their way into my life.
Congratulations on dating your species.
Yes,
it is
exactly.
So much nicer, isn't it?
It's so much nicer. And obviously, I can't say in the time since then that it's always been easy or that it's always been perfect. I think anyone can attest to that. But it's just been so much better and just has set with me so much more.
That's so wonderful. And I love hearing your story, and I'm so excited about your book. And we're coming to the close of our time together.
Goodness, already.
Is there,
just flies.
I know, it just flew by. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you wish that I had?
People usually ask me about my chapstick addiction because I mention it in my bio.
Hey, what's that deal with your chapstick addiction?
Oh, I figure if you're going to be addicted to something, chapstick's probably the safest thing.
I'm a Burt's Bees fan
myself.
Yeah,
that's some good quality stuff.
Chapstick isn't moisturizing enough for me. Plus, I like the tint.
Yes,
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I should clarify that now, like, actual quote-unquote chapstick brand doesn't cut it for me anymore. I need to shell out for the good stuff. A couple of years ago, I had a short stint making my own chapstick. And that, God, let me tell you, when I made my own batches of I even like bought the little tubes and everything. Let me tell you that when I made my own chapstick, I felt like Walter White in Breaking Bad. Like, I felt like I am the queen of the world. I never need to ask anything from anybody ever again. I have won the game because now I can make my own perfect chapstick.
That actually is pretty cool. And I can see some great marketing with like chapstick and the book together because
that's
if you're dating, you're going to need your lip moisture.
Oh, I didn't think about that.
It could be your thing. Like that could be your marketing giveaway that you do. I could totally see the tie-in.
Okay, all right. I'll take that idea. That's a freebie. Thank you very much, Miss Minx.
Well, marketers can't turn it off, unfortunately. Dedeker, it's been so lovely chatting with you. Once again, her book is The Smart Girl's Guide to Polyamory. Where can we find you and all your awesomeness?
Oh, goodness. I'm sneaking around everywhere. You can go to my site, DedekerWinston.com, or you can go to my podcast website, which is multiamory.com, multi like multivitamin, and then amory.com. You can find the book on Amazon. You can find it in your local Barnes & Noble, or you can find it, if you go ask your local bookseller to order it directly from the publisher and support local businesses. That's great too.
And we'll provide links to all of those on the show notes. Also, I have your Twitter and Instagram right here, which is your name, Dedeker Winston. If you're not sure how to spell it, check the show notes at polyweekly.com. Dedeker, thank you so much for joining us. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much. It was so much fun.
And we've been getting a good amount of feedback lately.
With people that, don't just want to set me on fire. So that's good.
We don't get that much negative feedback about you.
No, it's more fun to joke about than true. Again, if you laughed at what I just said, you have to wonder if it's true or not.
So the first one is from Gypsy, who wrote in.
More people disagree with you than me, actually.
Really, you think?
Yeah. They.
Well, I changed my stance on that.
You did, but not till after there was pitchforks.
I just needed a good grammatical reason to use they for a third-person singular antecedent. That's all I'm saying. So, episode 501, Gypsy wrote in to say, just listen to episode 501 with the woman who got dropped 3 times in poly relationships, and not only dropped, but left for a monogamous relationship, which seems to sting much more after agreements have been made about lifestyle choices. Ain't that the truth? You spend all the time talking about being poly and the person dumps you for monogamy or a monogamous relationship.
I don't know. Does it really hurt more than spend all your time talking about monogamy and somebody has an affair? You know me. I have a knee-jerk question. Well, I have a knee-jerk reaction about this pile of pain being more than that pile of pain.
That's true. So Gypsy said she found something that was helpful. It's the Daily Om guided audio meditation series entitled Breaking the Grip of Past Lovers by Jumana Sophia, and writes, This turned out to be exactly what I was looking for, because I didn't want to spend a lot of time focusing on my ex-lover. I wanted to focus on me and put myself first, because I felt like that's why I was so greatly affected by the breakup. I didn't have boundaries, and I was putting other people's needs equally or before my own. This woman guides you through 20-some meditations and offers you a safe place to go internally that you create with your own imagination with her guidance. It's a lot about sacred feminine womb space, which I've always had an aversion to, probably because I grew up in a very new age and thought it wasn't for me. However, if you allow yourself to be accessible to these kinds of thought processes, they can be overwhelmingly compassionate internally. She concludes, years later, I still use the sacred space that I travel to in my imagination. I respect that space, and I go there when I have time to tend to it and also play inside of it. However, most importantly, I have a place to be comforted by me, the only one who can ever truly be there for me, and feel safe. It helped me immensely with building boundaries, as I'm incredibly empathetic and sympathetic and sometimes don't have enough space for myself. I think that's a nice little tip.
Absolutely.
Now,
kudos for putting yourself first.
If I can find a link to that, I'll put it in the show notes. I haven't taken a specific look yet.
While we're doing feedback, we got this from Jay on episode 502 on coming out to kids. Jay writes, I didn't expect to be emailing you again so soon. I'm the one with the December 2016 Happy Poly moment you played. Hey, good for you, Jay. A little twofer. I am so glad you enjoyed it and it gave you some hope. But I wanted to give some feedback from episode 502 on the person asking about when to tell their kids they are poly. I think Lusty Guy's advice was spot on, though there are a few other things to consider. Kids can be judgmental as heck to other kids.
Oh, that's so true.
It really is.
Kids are mean.
The 8-year-old may tell his friends about his parents' polyamory, and they may encounter repercussions, loss of friends, etc., depending on where they live.
Name calling too, I bet.
Among other things, right?
Yeah.
Also, as their parents' relationship status filters up to their kids' friends' parents, wow, lots of possessives there, the friends' parents may decide to sever kiddo friendships with no input from either child.
Yeah, I hate when parents do that.
When I started my poly journey, I told my daughter immediately, she was 8, I didn't want her to think I was hiding anything from her or that I was ashamed. I leave it to her discretion whether to tell her friends or not, though I encourage her not to, as it really isn't other people's business. I happen to live in a relatively progressive area, which helped me make my decision. You know, I think that you're absolutely right with those points. As I said at the time, in the final analysis, I think it's a parenting decision, and I support those parents with the intimate knowledge they have of those kids and their context and the decision they think is best.
Yeah, you know your kids best.
Yeah. Having said that, you know, personally, when I was producing adult movies, I had friends who told me they would no longer be my friend. And this is as an adult. Right. And I had friends who told me that their kids could no longer associate with my kid. So, yeah.
Bored's going to rub off on your kids somehow.
Yeah, whatever, right? But it does happen, and I absolutely understand the sting of it. Having said that, from my perspective, one of the kind of provisos I live by is any decision that requires secrecy is one that I can't take for the long term because secrecy never lasts.
Yeah.
So, you know, if I'm just trying to avoid that shock and pain and whatnot for my kids by keeping a secret, eventually the secret's going to come out anyway. Might as well be in my time and choosing. But ultimately, parenting decision.
It's time for your Happy Poly Moment of the Week, brought to you by friendly polyamorists everywhere. We have 2 happy poly moments this week.
Lots of happy poly people.
I know. I was kind of finally getting to some of the email. This is from M, who said, my wife and I have been poly for a short time, just since August of the past year. While she was able to identify a partner right away, I had a much more difficult time. I'm a trans woman in a rather conservative area, so the potential partners list seemed to be pretty small. I was using OkCupid and was about to give up when I met a guy with whom I felt a connection. To be honest, this almost made me drop OKC immediately because I'd been let down several times in a row. He and I met for a date just before the new year, and we hit it off right away. We've been strengthening our relationship and working on being better people. My wife and I are now both happier than we've been in years, and we're really enjoying the freedom that comes from being able to discuss a variety of relationship issues with each other. My new partner and I really enjoy your podcast, and my wife listens to the occasional episode. Thanks so much for all you do. One last thing, and I think it's important. I learned that it's important not to give up your standards in order to find a partner. No argument here. I almost agreed to go on a date with a guy that I don't find all that reputable just because I was desperate to go out with someone. I'm glad that I waited and found my sweetie. Well, we are too.
Yeah, bravo.
Yeah.
You know, lowering your standards, whatever that means to you, is really just a disservice to yourself. Well done not doing so.
I find that it's in the way you perceive it. If you perceive of something as lowering your standards, you're probably not going to be happy with the results. If you perceive of something as expanding your boundaries or being more open-minded, then you might have better results. But again, it's in how you feel about it, right?
That's right. But the point being that you are absolutely worthy of treating yourself well enough to have high standards.
And our second happy poly moment is from Polygon Wild, who writes, "Would you mind if I greet her with a kiss?" asked Cinnamon. For the first time, the three of us are hanging out together with friends at a casual alternative/kinky all-day event. Why not? This is the moment I've been preparing myself for. It bothers me less and less when I think about my boyfriend Cinnamon and his partner Paprika. Okay, can I just say I like that we're referring to spices instead of letters? That makes it more interesting.
And it's not even the obvious salt and pepper.
I know. My boyfriend Cinnamon and his partner Paprika together. Earlier that morning, the three of us had a Skype call together. Everything's going really well between us. So when he tactfully asked me about display of affection towards her, I feel good agreeing. The kiss happens. I make sure I watch discreetly to find out about my own feelings. Nothing but happiness. So that was easy. The day went by and we all felt comfortable enough to hang out, hold hands, kiss, and cuddle. He's smiling so much. Some people are curious, but we're in a poly-friendly environment. Several times we're all connected through Cinnamon touching both of us, and it's beautiful. I doubted myself many times since the beginning of this relationship, which is only about 4 months ago. I'm extremely proud of where I am right now. Fighting jealousy hasn't only been about allowing my partner to have one girl in each arm. It's been a journey about accepting myself, realizing that I add value, that I have the right to be here, and that I can express my worries as an adult without drama or games. It's also about facing my internalized misogyny that used to whisper in my ear that that other woman is a threat, and actually finding a great friend in my metamor. So if you also struggle with jealousy, keep up the fight. You're worth it.
Congratulations.
Yeah. And by the way, Polygon Wild also signed up as a Polyweekly Playmate.
Well.
And is now supporting us on a monthly basis. Thank you.
I guess she was feeling a little they were feeling celebratory.
Yes. So you're worth it and we're worth it, I guess, too. That's nice. Thank you so much. And we also got a donation from Jay, whom we apparently met in Philly. I have to remember, we met so many people, I don't quite remember.
Yeah, no, I remember Jay.
Okay, you do. Okay,
yeah,
good.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I love this donation, by the way.
Of $96.69. Does that mean we have to do 69 twice? Once with you on top, once with me?
Yeah.
I don't know if 69 cents is enough for me to...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is. Come on, that's clever. That is clever. Give Jay Jay's due. Jay wins that one. That's a twofer.
Okay, fine. All right.
Now, for the next one, if you guys are thinking, oh, I'll do the same thing, Jay wins because it's clever. You got to be clever with this or add zeros. Up to you.
Well, I was going to say, so typically we'll do 69 with me on bottom, the way I like for a $69 donation. We'll do 69 with me on top, the way I dislike for a $96 donation. So really, if you want us to do both, whatever, I can't do math in my head. So if you add 96 and 69, then...
You're giving somebody too clever of an idea now. Just let them come up with it. The point being... Jay, well done.
The point being, we appreciate your donations
and
of any
yes.
size.
That's right. That's a good point. That's a better point than my point.
And of any kind. Your donation could be something like you write in with a question, or you write in with a happy poly moment, polyweekly@gmail.com. Or maybe this week it is you use the hashtag tripod to say, hey, Polyweekly is one of the podcasts I listen to. Or maybe you comment on our Facebook page at facebook.com/polyweekly, or you tweet us at polyweekly or at cunningminx. Or maybe you call our comment line, 802-505-POLY, and ask a question, leave a comment, propose a topic, whatever it is you want to do. We love it when you call into the comment line because it feels like you're more participating in the show than when you write in.
More voices is good.
More voices is always better. But that being said, I want to give a thanks again to Dedeker Winston for joining us and for telling us all about her new book, Smart Girl's Guide to Polyamory, and to Lusty Guy for giving up part of a lovely Saturday afternoon to sit behind the mic, behind closed doors.
Always good
me.
to sit next to Minx.
Yeah. And with that, I think we can wrap up and say...
It's not all about the sex.
About 69.